"Will you tell me what I have done?" His wife asked him, standing in the doorway of the library with a candle in her hand at nearly midnight, and the Duke of Quenington, who had been rehearsing cruelties for 11 months, chose the worst one in the collection. "I cannot bear the sight of you," he said. He watched it go into her. She did not cry out or argue or lower the candle. She stood in the doorway of a room she had every right to enter, in a wrapper the color of weak tea, and she looked at him for the length of perhaps 6 heartbeats. "Thank you," said Jocelyn. "I have been asking for a year, and you have answered me at last." Then she wished him a good night, and closed the door quietly, and Ansel, 5th Duke of Quenington, sat alone by a dead fire with the taste of it in his mouth. He could have called her back. There was time. He could hear her slippers on the stairs. He did not call her back, because he was a man who had built a fortress out of one afternoon in the yew walk and had been living in it ever since. 3 days after his wedding he had come round the corner of the yew hedge and seen his bride, in her new gray riding habit, put a sealed letter into the hand of a young man in a red coat. He had heard her say, in a low, hurried, frightened voice, that he must never know. Then she had looked up and seen her husband, and gone perfectly white. He had asked her nothing. That was the whole of his cowardice, and he had 11 months to admire it in. He had asked nothing, and she had explained nothing, and so he had gone away and built the fortress out of the only material he had, which was a red coat and 5 words in a low voice. He had not been unkind in any way a servant could report. He had been worse. He had been faultlessly, glitteringly polite. He had dined with her and passed her the salt and inquired after her headaches. He had given her £100 a quarter and jewels she never wore twice, and he had gone away to London for 6 weeks at a time, and had come back and been polite again. He had watched her turn from a girl who talked at breakfast into a woman who did not. And he had told himself every single day that a man of his consequence could not go to his wife and say the words, "I saw you, and I have been ill with it," and tell me it was nothing. The house woke him at 7:30 with the news. "Her Grace had gone up to town," said the butler, carefully, in the voice of a man laying out a corpse. "Her Grace had ordered the gig at 6, had taken the mail from the Fox at marriage, and had left instructions that no one was to be disturbed. Her boxes—" "One trunk, Your Grace, the brown one she came with." The butler hesitated. "Her Grace's maid is still here. Her Grace would not take her." On the desk in the library there were 3 things. The first was her wedding ring, in the middle of the blotter, where a man could not fail to see it. The second was a sheet of paper in her small upright hand, headed, "An inventory of what I have taken from Quenington." Underneath, 2 gowns, being my own, brought here from my father's house, 1 brown traveling trunk the same, my mother's prayer book, £6 11s, being what remains of my last quarter, of which £4 was earned by the sale of my own drawings. And then, in slightly smaller letters, "The jewels are on the dressing table. The keys are with Mrs. Ledbury. The Michaelmas accounts are made up to Friday, and the school roof is paid for, and I have written to the mason so that Your Grace need not." The third was a flat packet of letters, tied with tape, and a note upon it. "You have believed something of me since our 3rd day. I have known it since your face came round the yew hedge, and I have waited a year for you to ask, because I could not begin the conversation myself without accusing you, and I would not accuse you in your own house. Here is all of it. I do not ask you to read them. Only do not have them burned by a servant. Some of them are the last things a dead man wrote. J." Ansel stood over the desk for a long time. Then he sat down and untied the tape. There were 19 letters. 14 were from a woman, the hand galloping, the ink poor, the paper cheap, sometimes crossed twice over to save postage. They were signed Marion. Marion Braille. the elder sister, the one nobody in the county would name, the one who had gone off 4 years ago with an ensign of no family and less money, and had been struck out of her father's Bible in ink, and was understood by everybody, including Ansel, at his own dinner table, with the port going round to be dead or worse. She was not dead. She was in a lodging house at Salt Cay, and her ensign had died of fever at Antigua 14 months ago, and she was taking in sewing, and she had been kept alive from the day of her sister's wedding to the present hour by £3 a month sent secretly out of the pin money of the Duchess of Quenington. 5 of the letters were from the young man in the red coat, Lieutenant Peter Ashe of the same regiment, the dead ensign's cousin, who had carried the money down and the letters back because a duchess could not be seen writing to Salt Cay, and because the post at marriage was read by a postmistress who talked. In the last one he wrote, "I have told her nothing of your circumstances. It is not for me to say, Your Grace, but a husband who loved you would be a better courier than I am." And in one of Marian's, in a passage Ansel read 4 times, "You must not tell him. Promise me you will not tell him. I have cost my father his peace, and I will not cost you your marriage. A duke of that name cannot have a sister at Salt Cay taking in shirts, and if he learns of me he will forbid you, and then I shall have taken the last thing you have. He must never know." That was the sentence he had built the fortress out of. It had never once been about him. He did not order his horse. That was the strangest part of the day, and afterwards he understood it. A man who has broken something does not run to it at once. He goes and looks at what he has been living in. He walked to the village. The rector's wife told him, before he had asked anything, that the Duchess had been down on Tuesdays to hear the girls read, and asked whether Tuesdays would go on. The mason at the school said the Duchess had beaten him down over the slate and had been right about it. In the lane, a woman with a bandaged arm curtsied and said, "God bless her, Your Grace, for the broth in January." Nobody in the parish, it emerged, had had a headache, a leaking roof, or a bad winter that his wife had not quietly attended to out of £100 a quarter, £3 a month of which had gone to Salt Cay. Mrs. Ledbury, the housekeeper, gave him the keys, and then, being 62 and having known him since he was in Nankin's, gave him rather more than the keys. She sat with the door open, Your Grace, she said. Every evening you were at home, in the yellow parlor with the door open onto the passage, so as to hear you come out of the library, so as to be there if you should want to speak. 11 months. And then she would go up at midnight and I would take her candle. Ansel went and stood in the yellow parlor, where the chair had been drawn round to face the open door, and where a work-basket sat with a stocking of his in it, darned 3/4 of the way and abandoned. He reached Salt Cay on the 3rd evening, a gray little harbor town smelling of tar and fish, a lodging house with a bleached door and a bell that did not work. Marian Braille opened it. She was thinner than her sister and older than her years, with reddened hands, and she knew him instantly. And she did the bravest thing he had seen in his life, which was to stand in the doorway of a lodging house and bar it against a duke. "She is not well enough to be shouted at," she said. "Madam, I have not come to shout. You are the man who has been polite to her for a year." Marian's chin went up in a manner that was becoming familiar to him. "She never said one word against you, not one, in 19 letters, and I could not get it out of her with a crowbar. It was I who worked it out, sir, from what she did not say." "Will you let me in?" "No," said Marian, "but you may stand in the passage and I will ask her." He stood in a passage that smelled of cabbage, with his hat in his hand, for 11 minutes. Jocelyn came down in the brown traveling dress. She had been crying at some point in the past 3 days and had stopped, and there was a needle threaded through the front of her bodice, and the sight of it, his wife, a duchess, taking in sewing at Salt Key within a week, went through him like cold water. "Your grace should not have come so far," she said. "It cannot be pleasant here." "I saw you in the yew walk," said Ansel. She went still. "I saw you give a letter to Lieutenant Ashe, and I heard you say that I must never know, and I did not ask you what it meant, not once in 11 months, because I was afraid of the answer. I decided instead that you had been in love with him and had married me because your father made you, and I set out to be so cold that you would never have the chance to tell me so." His voice was not steady, and he let it not be steady. "I have read the letters, all of them, twice. You have been keeping your sister alive on your pin money and going without a maid on the days you sent it, and you let me be a stranger in my own house rather than risk what I might do to her. I have not been a husband to you. I have been a magistrate." Jocelyn put her hand on the banister rail. "You might have asked me," she said. "On the 4th day, on any of 300 days, I would have told you everything before the words were out of your mouth." "Yes, I loved you within a month," she said, quite steadily, which was the hardest thing he ever had to hear. "That is why I sat in the parlor with the door open, and then you told me you could not bear the sight of me, and I found that I could bear a great deal, but not that, and not for the rest of my life, so I took 2 gowns and my mother's book and I came away." She looked at him. "I am not coming back to be pitied, Ansel. I would rather so." He had prepared nothing. Everything he said in that passage he said badly and out of order, and he never afterwards regretted a word of it. "Then do not come back," he said. "Not yet, let me court you. I am your wife. You are the woman I married in a hurry to please a will and a lawyer, and I have never once called upon you." He turned his hat over in his hands. "I shall take a room at the inn on the quay. I shall call at 3 o'clock, like any man with no rights in the house, and you may send me away at the door as often as you please, and I shall keep coming until you tell me to stop, or until you believe me. Your sister comes to Quenington whenever she chooses, publicly, at my table, and any soul in the county who has a remark to make about it may make it to me. And the ring stays in your keeping, not mine. If you never put it on again, that is my doing and I will live in it." There was a silence in the cabbage-smelling passage. 3 o'clock, said Jocelyn. He was there for 5 weeks. He took the room over the tap-room, and the whole of Salt Key knew inside 2 days who he was, and he did not care in the least. He called at 3. On the first day she sent him away at the door. On the second, she let him sit in the front room for a quarter of an hour with Marion present, and he talked about the school roof and the mason, and was made to feel a fool, deservedly. On the 9th day she walked with him along the harbor wall. On the 20th she laughed at something he said, and then stopped, appalled at herself, and he had to look out to sea for a while. On the 34th day, on a bench above the tide, with the gulls going over, she took his hand and put it against her cheek and held it there, and neither of them said anything at all for some minutes. They came home in October, all 3 of them. Marion Braille was given the dower cottage at Quenington, and 150 a year in her own name, and the county said what the county always says, and got over it faster than anybody expected, largely because the Duke of Quenington took his sister-in-law into church on his arm on the first Sunday, and looked once around the pews. The yellow parlor door was never shut again. It became a joke between them, and then a habit, and then simply how the house was. And in the Duke's pocketbook, folded small, worn soft at the creases, carried for the rest of his life, there was a sheet of paper in a small upright hand that began, "An inventory of what I have taken from Quenington." He read it sometimes late, when he had been a hard man to somebody in the House of Lords, as a means of remembering exactly what he was capable of. "You keep that dreadful thing," Jocelyn said to him once, finding it. "I keep it," said Ansel, "because there was a morning when 6 pounds 11 shillings and 2 gowns were more than I deserved to be left with, and because I intend never to be that man again." He folded it away. "And because I cannot bear the sight of it, which is, my love, the only true use I have ever found for that sentence."